the simplest childhood prayer, the ultimate disguise. She asked God for blue eyes. He said no. That rejection became the single most necessary tool to save hundreds of lives from one of history's darkest religious evils. This is the story of Amy Carmichael. See how her total surrender built the Dohnavur Fellowship, a star of hope that took on a 1,000-year-old system and won. The Irish linen and the seed of faith. Listen closely now to the sound of the Atlantic wind moving over the eastern coast of Ireland. There is the gentle rush of sea foam against the shore, a steady, rhythmic cadence of nature itself, a constant echo of eternity. This is the sound of home for a young girl named Amy Carmichael, the idyllic coast and the industry of faith. Our story begins in the mid-19th century, in the verdant, rolling landscape of County Down, Northern Ireland. Specifically, it begins in the small, unassuming village of Millil, a peaceful place defined by the primary industry that ran through its economic and social life, the delicate, meticulous work of linen manufacturing. The linen trade was more than just a means of income. It was a regional ethos. It required an extraordinary degree of precision, as flax fibers had to be spun into threads of perfect uniformity. It demanded patience, as the bleaching process could take months under the sun. And above all, it enforced unwavering standards of quality, for the product was famed worldwide. These same intrinsic values, precision, patience, and quality, were the defining characteristics of the Carmichael family and their domestic life. The father, a successful and well-respected linen mill owner, was a man whose faith informed every business decision. He established a comfortable, stable, and ethically sound environment for his 7 children. But the true, non-monetary wealth of the Carmichael home lay not in the successful mill, but in its profound spiritual discipline, a sanctuary of Presbyterian piety. The Carmichael residence was less a house and more a sanctuary of Christian piety, anchored firmly in the conservative Presbyterian tradition of Ulster. The family was not merely religious. They were devout followers of the gospel, adhering to a lifestyle where the sacred was woven seamlessly into the mundane. In this household, the Bible was not merely a book, but the very foundation of daily life and thought. Imagine the quiet, reverent scene around the family hearth. Morning and evening, the family would gather for their set devotions. The air was filled with the resonant sound of singing psalms, which spoke of God's majesty and sovereign power, followed by the disciplined, systematic reading of Holy Scripture. It was here, in this atmosphere of constant, gentle immersion, that the seeds of Amy's extraordinary faith were first sown. Every meal began with a grace that expressed profound dependency on the Creator, and every decision was weighed against the standard of the Lord's will. This rigorous yet loving environment taught a theology that was practical. Obedience was not simply a rule to avoid punishment, but a direct path to reflecting the character of Christ. Service was not an optional charitable choice, but a spiritual necessity, a natural outpouring of a heart transformed by grace. These fundamental lessons were breathed in with the clean, salt-laced sea air and were woven into the very fabric of her childhood, as surely as flax was woven into linen. The family example, integrity and generosity. The lessons were imparted not only through the words of Scripture, but crucially, through the example of her parents. Her father's business integrity was known throughout the county. a living testimony that a man could be both commercially successful and uncompromisingly Christian. He taught his children that the fear of the Lord, a profound, affectionate reverence for God's holiness, was the beginning of all true wisdom and the most powerful antidote to the superficiality, greed, and vanity of the world. Furthermore, the family practiced sacrificial generosity. The poor of Millil were not forgotten. Amy often witnessed her parents extending quiet, practical help to those who worked at the mill or struggled in the village. This demonstration of faith in action taught Amy the vital link between a soul's devotion and the visible deeds of mercy. It taught her that Christian faith must have feet. The prayer for blue eyes, a test of faith. Within this disciplined spiritual home, there was nonetheless room for the tender and often amusing expressions of a child's blossoming literal faith. Amy had a distinguishing physical feature. She possessed an unusually dark complexion and striking deep brown eyes, a rarity among the generally fair-skinned Irish population of Ulster. In her youthful imagination, perhaps influenced by the romantic literature or societal standards of the time, she conceived a powerful desire to be more like the pale children often idealized in stories. She longed, with the full force of a child's heart, for blue eyes, the barn, and the absolute confidence. One day, driven by the absolute, unwavering confidence of a child who believes every biblical promise literally, she put her desire to the ultimate test. She gathered her younger brother, Frank, and together they sought a quiet, private place, a barn on the property, smelling of dry hay and cool earth. In that secluded space, they knelt down. Amy directed the prayer, asking God with simple, direct, and utterly sincere earnestness to change her brown eyes to blue. It was a prayer of profound yet immature faith, a literal interpretation of the scriptural promise that God hears and answers the prayers of his children. She prayed and prayed again until the moment seemed absolutely complete and the miracle, in her mind, a certainty. Then she opened her eyes and rushed eagerly to a polished silver or perhaps a small hand mirror to witness the dramatic transformation, the reflection, and the lifelong lesson. The mirror, of course, reflected the same familiar, deep brown eyes. The initial disappointment must have been sharp, a child's sudden, jarring encounter with an unanswered prayer. Was God not listening? Was his promise not true? This seemingly trivial experience, however, held a profound, lifelong lesson, one that would only be fully understood decades later. Theology of desire. It taught her to distinguish between prayer that seeks to change God's perfect creation to suit a personal, superficial whim, and prayer that seeks conformity to God's perfect will and purpose. Providential design. More importantly, she learned that the Lord was reserving those very dark eyes for a far greater divine purpose. The features she had once wished away, the brown eyes, the dark hair, and the naturally deep complexion, would become God's providentially prepared tools. Later in life, in the scorching heat and challenging foreign culture of India, that very appearance would allow her to effectively blend in. It would enable her to wear the sari authentically and move among the vulnerable women and children she served with an ease that a fair-skinned, blue-eyed Western missionary could never achieve. The dark eyes would become her key to sanctuary, her essential pass into the hidden corners of the nation, and her effective disguise against those who wished to stop her work. The childhood prayer, though seemingly unanswered in the moment, was a powerful act of foreshadowing. It demonstrated early on that God's plan is not always the one we initially desire, but it is always infinitely better, perfectly wise, and ultimately effective. Her youthful desire for conformity to a social ideal was graciously and wisely overruled by God's design for missionary effectiveness. The immutability of God and the practicality of faith. The Carmichael home instilled in Amy the profound truth of the immutability of God, that He is unchanging, holy, and utterly trustworthy. The failure of her eyes to change was therefore not a failure of God's power, but a redirection of His loving purpose. This early lesson in obedience and submission to divine wisdom was not a philosophical abstract, but a practical reality. Life in Millil was secure, but her spiritual training was not soft. It was disciplined. It taught Amy that faith was not a warm, abstract feeling, but a practical commitment that required daily, intentional choice. It was the seed of faith, small and almost unnoticed in the quiet, sheltered corners of the Irish coast, yet planted in deep, fertile ground, ready to grow into a life of monumental sacrifice. The comfortable, stable home, filled with scripture and prayer, was preparing a young soul for a world far removed from the green fields of Ireland. Amy was being equipped with a quiet inner fortitude that would be necessary when the storms of persecution and the relentless trials of the mission field inevitably arose. The strong biblical foundation laid down through years of consistent family devotion was the ultimate unseen protective armor. The image of the young girl looking into the mirror, her deep brown eyes reflecting back the certainty of God's wisdom, remains with us. She closes her eyes now, accepting the beautiful, ordered life her parents have created for her, understanding that every good and perfect gift is from above. James 1:17. The world Amy knows is secure, ordered, and bathed in the familiar, guiding light of the gospel. But her adult life will soon lead her out of this comfort and into the harsh realities of the world's suffering. The seed is planted, the time for harvest is coming, and it begins not on a distant shore, but with a journey from the comfort of the family hearth to the grim reality of poverty in a nearby city. A first pivotal step out of the linen mill's gentle shadow. The Shawleys of Belfast, gold, silver, or straw. Listen now to the sharp, unfamiliar sound of heavy machinery, the clatter and rhythmic slam of looms from the great industrial city of Belfast. We have moved from the clean sea air and serene coasts of Millil to the dense, smoky atmosphere of a thriving manufacturing hub, a place of iron and steam. Belfast, in the late 19th century, was a city of stark, almost unbelievable contrasts. It was the Linenopolis of the world, a place of immense wealth and grand Victorian architecture, fueled entirely by the sweat and ceaseless labor of its factory workers. Here, amid the grime and the grandeur, a different, urgent kind of lesson awaited the young Amy Carmichael. The two cities of the Sunday walk. Though the Carmichael family home and their deepest roots remained on the coast, the demands of the lucrative linen business were centralized in Belfast. The family often spent extended periods in the city, where the financial and social gravity of their lives pulled them. It was here, in the crowded, bustling streets, that Amy encountered a vivid, unsettling contrast to the ordered comfort and gentle piety of her upbringing in the country. Imagine a typical Sunday afternoon, a brief, enforced moment of silence in the city's industrial roar. The morning service has concluded, and the respectable churchgoers stream out onto the pavement. They are dressed in their finest attire, the men in tailored worsted wool, carrying their top hats. The women, including Amy, in silken gowns, their bonnets tied neatly under their chins, their demeanor serious, composed, and unhurried. Amy, a part of this well-dressed, respectable throng, walks home alongside them, her thoughts perhaps lingering on the morning's lofty sermon about Christian love and charity. But the walk takes a deliberate route, cutting through districts where the facade of wealth and respectability quickly gives way to the gritty reality of industrial poverty. The sound of the looms may be silent on Sunday, but the evidence of the laborers' harsh lives is everywhere. The very air tastes different, thick with the soot from countless chimneys and the damp smell of close, overcrowded housing. It is here that the Shawleys make their appearance. This was the name, part descriptive, part dismissive, given to the young women who worked long, arduous hours, often from before sunrise until well past sunset, in the deafening, lint-filled linen mills of Belfast. They were named for the distinctive heavy wool shawls they wore wrapped tightly around their heads and shoulders. These shawls were not a fashion statement. They were a necessity, often the only protection they had against the damp cold of the streets and the fine, dangerous dust that permeated the factory air and settled deep in their lungs. They were the working poor, existing precariously on the margins of Victorian society. As the tidy, prosperous stream of churchgoers passed, these Shawleys stood out with painful clarity. Their clothing was worn thin, their faces prematurely aged by fatigue, their hands rough and reddened by constant exposure to harsh industrial chemicals and cold water. They were a visible, impoverished, and largely forgotten segment of the population, entirely separate from the comfortable society that had just emerged from the church doors. The two groups walked past one another, separated by an immense, invisible gulf of class and circumstance. The scars of indifference, an encounter, and a conviction. It was during one of these walks, amidst the general Sunday spectacle of polite society, that the seminal moment occurred, a simple, fleeting encounter that acted as a spiritual pivot point in Amy's young life. As the respectable church party was walking, they passed an old, impoverished beggar woman. Her clothing was rags, her posture bent with age and hardship, her appearance one of deep distress and visible destitution. She was simply a regrettable part of the urban landscape, one that was easily ignored by most of the passing crowd, dismissed with a brief inward shudder. But as the Carmichael party moved past, Amy noticed something deeply unsettling and specific. The beggar woman was shivering, clearly struggling with the persistent chill of the Belfast air. And she watched, not just as the woman was ignored, but as she was actively shunned. A well-dressed couple from the church recoiled from her in open distaste, their expressions a clear mixture of fear of contagion and moral disdain for perceived idleness. Amy was struck with a sudden, overwhelming, and burning sense of shame and indignation. She saw, in that instant, the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the Christian profession of the church members, who had minutes before sung hymns about compassion, and their immediate, cold, and cruel reaction to a suffering human being. The profound words of the gospel, which spoke so clearly of serving the least of these my brethren, seemed to evaporate the moment they stepped outside the stained glass windows and onto the public street. In that moment, a powerful, accusatory question seared itself into her young heart. Where was the love of Christ? Driven by an irresistible holy impulse, she broke away from her family and their respectable party, a visible breach of decorum. She approached the beggar woman. She spoke to her kindly, offering what little comfort and recognition she could, a small act that was far more valuable to the woman's dignity than any hastily offered coin. This small gesture was a public declaration of war against the polite indifference of her own class. Gold, silver, or straw, the unforgettable scripture. The shame Amy felt was not the fleeting embarrassment of a social misstep, but a profound spiritual conviction that came directly from Scripture and became the bedrock of her life's subsequent radicalism. Later, this experience, the contrast between the gold standard piety professed inside the church and the straw standard love demonstrated outside, crystallized around a specific potent passage from the first epistle of Paul to the Corinthians 3:12-15. The passage speaks of Christian workers building upon the sole foundation of Christ with various materials: gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, and straw. It declares that every person's work will ultimately be tested by fire, and only the materials of lasting eternal worth, gold, silver, and costly stones, will survive. The rest, the wood, hay, and straw, representing a self-serving or shallow existence, will be entirely consumed, and the builder, though saved, will suffer loss. The conviction in Amy's soul was clear and uncompromising. The indifference and social snobbery she had witnessed were straw. They were works that would utterly perish in the purifying fire of God's judgment. Building a comfortable life, maintaining a respectable social reputation, and attending all the required church services were not enough. True, lasting service, the gold and silver of God's eternal reward, was found only in the radical, sacrificial act of loving and serving those whom society had discarded. She grasped that while her personal salvation was secure in Christ, her service and her eternal rewards would be weighed by the quality of her life's actions. She realized with dread that her comfortable, inherited life, if lived selfishly and within the bounds of social expectation, would amount only to wood, hay, and straw. This conviction, born from a sudden, stark moment of truth in a Belfast side street, marked a permanent, absolute turning point. Her faith transitioned immediately from a beautiful, disciplined inheritance into a fiery, uncompromising activist commitment. She could no longer tolerate the paralyzing gap between belief and tangible, loving practice. A radical embrace, ministry to the least, the Shawleys, the impoverished mill girls, became the immediate and enduring object of her transforming passion. These women were not only desperately poor, but they were often subject to poor, overcrowded housing, crippling hours that damaged their health, and significant social risks due to their poverty and lack of protection. They were precisely the kind of people Christ identified as the least of these. Amy began reaching out to them with a quiet, persistent energy that belied her refined upbringing. She started small, acting with strategic humility. It began perhaps with a simple invitation to a cup of tea in a clean, warm room, a shared, simple Bible reading, or an impromptu prayer meeting offered during their brief break. Her method was profoundly simple and devastatingly effective, genuine, non-judgmental, person-to-person love. She treated the Shawleys not as a social project to be managed, but as sisters, recognizing their immense inherent worth as souls created in the image of God. Her commitment required immense social bravery. It meant consciously crossing the rigid, invisible lines of class and respectability that characterized Victorian Belfast. Her former society, the same people who had snubbed the beggar woman, must have viewed her efforts with confusion, suspicion, or perhaps pity for her misplaced zeal. But for Amy, the fear of man had been eclipsed by the clear, immediate, and all-consuming conviction of the Holy Spirit. The fledgling ministry grew organically, fueled by Amy's tireless effort and the desperate spiritual and physical need of the women she served. What began as a handful of girls soon expanded into a growing number, eager for the spiritual refuge, the physical warmth, and the simple human dignity she offered. The weight of the conviction that her service would be tested by fire was not a burden. It was a powerful, liberating force. It freed her entirely from the tyranny of social expectation and focused her gaze entirely on the eternal judgment seat of Christ. She chose to build with gold and silver, the material of sacrificial, embodied love. The image of the rough woven shawls of the mill girls remains vivid. They are a physical symbol of the harsh lives that Amy Carmichael decided to embrace and serve, and a powerful, living contrast to the silken shawls and bonnets of the respectable churchgoers. The small, unofficial gatherings soon outgrew any simple parlour or borrowed room. The growing number of Shawleys demanded something more permanent, something more dedicated. A foundation of love and conviction had been laid in the open streets of Belfast, and now that foundation required a shelter. The next phase of her radical faith will demand a test of God's provision for a vision that is quickly becoming too large for her to manage alone. The ministry is about to ask for a roof and 4 walls, a hall called Welcome, the architecture of divine provision. Silence in the small, borrowed room was broken only by the softest of sounds, the gentle rustle of a shawl and the steady rhythm of kneeling prayer. Listen now to the voice of a young woman, speaking with absolute certainty to a listening God. This is the sound of a need too large for human resources, a vision so ambitious that only divine intervention can bring it to pass. It is the language of radical dependence, where faith precedes finance. The swelling tide, a ministry outgrown. The nascent ministry to the Shawleys, the marginalised mill workers of Belfast, had begun with a simple conviction and a handful of girls in a cramped, borrowed room. It grew not by human marketing, but by the relentless, astonishing speed of divine blessing. The spiritual hunger of these young women was vast, a dry earth desperate for the rain, and Amy's genuine, practical love was the answer they instinctively sought. She offered them a place of unconditional belonging, where the gospel was presented not as a distant ideal, but as the present reality of Christ's transforming power. The small meetings swelled into large, animated gatherings. Soon, the ministry outgrew every space that could be offered to it, from church annexes to rented schoolrooms. The need for a dedicated, permanent place of refuge and instruction did not just become urgent, it became critical to the continued existence of the work itself. The logistics of the burgeoning community demanded a sanctuary. Amy's vision was not for a mere functional meeting room, a temporary shelter to hold a crowd. her mind conceived of a spiritual and physical sanctuary, a substantial, permanent structure. It would be a place of warmth against the industrial chill, a pocket of safety amidst the city's dangers, and an unwavering beacon of gospel truth. This sanctuary would be named, with profound simplicity and clarity, the Welcome Hall. The name itself was a clear, unmistakable statement of purpose, an open, non-judgmental door to those habitually excluded, overlooked, and forgotten by society. It was God's invitation made visible in brick and mortar. The ambition of this vision, however, far surpassed the personal means of Amy Carmichael. She was a woman of profound faith, but her personal resources, already stretched by the day-to-day demands of the ministry, were patently insufficient for purchasing land and erecting a sizable, lasting building in a rapidly developing city like Belfast. The total cost was formidable. Amy understood that this was not merely a matter of skillful human fundraising strategy. It was an explicit test of divine dependence, the principle of pure dependence. Amy made a deliberate, conscious choice, a commitment that would define her life's work and later become a hallmark of her ministry in India. She would not appeal to the public for funds. She refused to employ the persuasive techniques of human fundraising, to publish appeals in journals, or to solicit donations through emotional, public pressure. This was not due to a lack of urgency, but due to a deeply rooted conviction. If the vision was truly from God, then God Himself would be responsible for providing all the necessary resources. To solicit funds from men would suggest a lack of faith in the ultimate provider. The quiet, daily work of prayer became, quite literally, the architecture of the Welcome Hall. Amy did not passively wait. She actively engaged. She went to the Lord with specific, tangible petitions: the cost of the land, the price of the brick, the volume of mortar, the strength of the roof timbers, the specific pieces of furniture. She prayed not with anxious, hand-wringing pleading, but with the calm, deliberate expectation of a child asking a father who holds all things in his hand. This commitment became a profound, practical lesson in faith, patience, and the sovereign timing of God. The process was not instant or dramatic, but gradual and unfolding through quiet, unexpected channels. The money arrived as quietly and surely as the dawn, sometimes through small, anonymous gifts pressed into her hand by a grateful surely, and sometimes through larger, specific donations from unexpected sources, often from men and women across the sea who knew nothing of the physical project, but who are simply responding to a quiet divine prompting. The provision came not through human pressure or calculated appeal, but through divine persuasion upon the hearts of men and women she had never met. The construction of the Welcome Hall became a living, visible testament to the power of prayer to meet tangible, material needs. Every brick laid, every window installed to let in the light, every beam secured, stood as an irrefutable answer to requests laid before the throne of God. It was a structure built on prayer, financed by faith, and erected to the glory of Christ alone. Christ's preeminence, the banner of truth. When the building was finally completed and the wide doors of the Welcome Hall were thrown open, a moment that filled the surrounding streets with the joy of the Shawleys. It was a moment of immense spiritual triumph. But the true victory was not merely in the grand reality of the structure itself. It was in the clear, stated, theological purpose for which the building existed. Amy ensured that the entire ministry was outwardly focused on the absolute supremacy and preeminence of Jesus Christ. This commitment was made physically visible and non-negotiable within the hall itself. Imagine walking into the large, humble, yet deeply comforting space. The aroma of coal-fire warmth and fresh-baked bread often mingled with the quiet reverence. Above the main meeting area, where the Shawleys gathered for instruction, prayer, and fellowship, there was a prominent banner, a lasting inscription that captured the unwavering theological cornerstone of her work. The specific text she chose to emphasize was from Paul's epistle to the Colossians, chapter 1, verse 18, which declares Christ to be text, the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. This banner was not merely decorative, it was doctrinal and directional. It established the absolute non-negotiable centrality of Christ in every single aspect of the ministry. It declared that the Welcome Hall was not about Amy Carmichael's charisma, not about the merits of social work, and certainly not about the temporary relief of temporal poverty, but entirely about the sovereign rule of Jesus Christ over his church and his people. Every single activity within those walls, the passionate Bible studies, the warm fellowship, the practical aid, the hymns sung in unison, was filtered through this singular truth. Christ must have the preeminence. He was the ultimate authority, the source of power, and the sole purpose of their gathering. This theological clarity was the safeguard that prevented the ministry from drifting into mere secular philanthropy. It remained radically, joyfully Christ-centered. A practical laboratory of service, the Welcome Hall became a vibrant, essential laboratory of service. Within these walls, the young Amy Carmichael learned the profound practicalities of pastoral care, evangelism, and leadership. She learned to lead by quiet example, to teach with unwavering confidence in the Scripture, to comfort those bruised by life, and to counsel the confused and the broken-hearted, all while maintaining her complete reliance on God for the simplest needs of the day. She had learned to pray for a penny and trust for £1,000. She spent years pouring her life into the Shawleys, demonstrating the gold standard love that her conscience had initially demanded on the damp streets of Belfast. Her initial conviction, a single spark of compassion, was now fully realized in the sustained, joyful sacrifice that took place within these dedicated walls. The hall stood as an undeniable testimony to the fact that when God calls, He also provides, and the true, effective service is simply the overflow of Christ's preeminence in the heart of the servant. The quiet resolve of her faith, forged in the rigorous discipline of her youth, was now tested and affirmed by the construction and sustenance of this spiritual refuge. She had seen the invisible hand of God move mountains of earthly resources in response to simple, believing prayer. The hustle and warmth, the laughter and quiet prayers of the Welcome Hall fade now, leaving only the memory of that clear, imposing banner, that in all things He might have the preeminence. This powerful truth was not just fixed on a wall, it was firmly fixed in Amy's soul. She was ready. Yet even in the midst of this flourishing local ministry, a beautiful success, a vast unseen world lay waiting. God had prepared her in the small things, demonstrating his unwavering power to provide. Now, the quiet voice of a greater, more urgent global need is about to call her away from the comfortable, successful walls of the Welcome Hall toward a sacrifice of a very different, far greater magnitude. A voice from Keswick, the missionary call. Listen now to the sound of a great multitude gathered in unified silence, a quietness more potent than any noise. This is the atmosphere of the Keswick Convention, a renowned place of spiritual renewal in the north of England, where the Holy Spirit often spoke to the surrendered heart. It is here that Amy Carmichael's life's trajectory will be permanently and profoundly redirected. She arrived as a dedicated worker in Belfast. She would leave as a missionary elect, with the entire globe as her prospective parish. The atmosphere of consecration and clarity. The Keswick Convention, held annually amidst the serene and soul-stirring beauty of the Lake District, was far more than a simple conference. It was a vital gathering point for Christians worldwide committed to deeper holiness and global missions. The location itself, nestled among the ancient hills, seemed to encourage a step back from the world and a deeper communion with God. For Amy, attending Keswick was a spiritual pilgrimage, a time to step away from the relentless, absorbing demands of the Welcome Hall and immerse herself fully in teaching and fellowship focused on the victorious Christian life, the life lived in continuous dependence on the indwelling Christ. The central, recurring themes of the convention were always consecration and surrender, the deep, radical commitment to yield one's entire will, future, and possessions to the absolute disposal of God. The teaching was not academic. It was intensely practical, fiercely fervent, and centered entirely on the sufficiency of Christ for both a holy life and effective service. It was the perfect incubator for the kind of radical obedience that characterized the missionary spirit. This environment provided the missing piece for Amy, a clear global focus for the intense piety and tireless zeal she already possessed. It was during these conventions that Amy forged one of the most enduring and significant relationships of her early adult life, a friendship with Robert Wilson. Wilson, a successful businessman and deeply devoted Christian, known affectionately as the Director of Missions, DOM, became more than just a friend. He functioned as a crucial spiritual mentor, recognizing Amy's singular piety, passion, and unique ability for leadership and sacrifice. His influence provided immediate spiritual counsel and, later, vital financial and structural support for her monumental global work. He was a human anchor and encouragement for her future ventures of faith. The convention was a spiritual high point, a place where the air seemed charged with the acute awareness of God's presence and the vast, urgent need of the unreached world. Every sermon, every hymn, every shared prayer seemed to converge on the single, inescapable truth. The world is lost, and the church must go. The turning point. Hudson Taylor's testimony. In one of those great gatherings, seated among the thousands, Amy was listening intently to a speaker whose very name was synonymous with radical, trusting faith. James Hudson Taylor. Taylor was a revered founder of the China Inland Mission, a man who had pioneered the faith mission concept, relying solely on God for all provision while serving millions in the vast, unreached interior of China. His life was a living sermon on Matthew 6:33, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." Taylor's voice, though perhaps gentle in tone, carried immense weight and authority, drawn from a life utterly consecrated to the missionary cause. He spoke with simplicity, yet his words were like spiritual fire, cutting through any complacent religiosity in the audience. He did not offer a complex theological lecture. He offered a stark, profound, and heartbreaking truth about the state of the world. He spoke not as a strategist, but as a wounded shepherd, sharing about the millions upon millions of souls in China and beyond who were living and passing away without ever hearing the name of Jesus Christ. He painted a visceral picture of a lost humanity adrift in darkness, and he spoke of the enormous, almost incomprehensible gap between the number of available Christian workers and the size of the world's desperate need. He asked the audience, "Can we bear to see the millions of China passing into Christless eternity and not use every means in our power to bring them the gospel?" The weight of this reality pressed down upon the large audience, but it fell upon Amy Carmichael with a singular, unescapable force. For her, this was not mere statistics recited from a platform. It was a devastating revelation of a need that only Christ's most dedicated disciples could and must address. The clear, personal call and absolute surrender. In that hushed, potent moment, amidst the sea of people whose lives would be forever changed, Amy felt the clear, personal call of God. It was not an audible voice, but a profound, deep-seated conviction that resonated instantly with the spiritual foundation laid in her childhood at Millel and affirmed during the intense work at the Welcome Hall. She realized with sudden, stunning clarity that the geographical boundaries of her successful service in Belfast were suddenly, devastatingly too small. Her successful work with the Shawleys was good, necessary, and blessed, but the call to the uttermost parts of the earth was now undeniable, eclipsing everything else. She looked inwardly at the map of the world, the map illuminated by the knowledge of Christ, and saw the vast, unreached territories. In that moment, the spiritual fire of surrender ignited, transforming her already dedicated life into one of radical availability. The question became immediate, sharp, and personal, echoing the challenge of the prophets. If I know these millions are perishing without the gospel, and I have the capacity to go, how can I justify staying? This was the moment of absolute surrender. It was not a reluctant submission to a harsh duty, but a joyous, willing, and final act of consecration. She yielded her flourishing local ministry, her relative comfort, her secure life in Ireland, and herself to the global mission field. The covenant she made with God was simple and complete, cementing her life's purpose. Lord, I will go where you want me to go, and I will do what you want me to do. The spiritual fire. From local dedication to global commitment. The essential effect of the Keswick Convention on Amy was to move her from local dedication to global commitment. She recognized that the spiritual fire ignited by her early conviction, the foundational choice between building one's life with gold, silver, precious stones, or with wood, hay, straw, could only be fully satisfied by taking the gospel to those who had never heard it. The straw she had feared had taken the form of a contented life in Belfast. Her decision was rooted in the theological conviction of God's universal compassion and the explicit biblical mandate to make disciples of all nations. The command of Christ was not limited to the industrial streets of Belfast. It extended to the entire, beautiful, and broken world. She left Keswick with an inner resolve that was calm but absolute. The comfort of the familiar had been exchanged for the glorious, faith-dependent uncertainty of a mission undertaken solely by faith. She knew with unwavering confidence that the God who provided the welcome hall in response to prayer would certainly provide for her on the other side of the world. Her relationship with Robert Wilson proved immediately vital. As her spiritual mentor and a man of great influence in mission circles, he affirmed her call, providing the wisdom and structural connection necessary for this massive step. His later financial sponsorship would be crucial, but his spiritual endorsement was the immediate confirmation she needed to proceed. The vast, unseen world of souls passing away without Christ pressed upon Amy's heart, replacing the familiar needs of the mill girls with the immense, heartbreaking needs of the global population. The sound of the convention's final hymn, perhaps All for Jesus, fades now, replaced by the quiet inner resolve of a woman who has heard the clear voice of her master. She is ready to go, willing to surrender everything to follow the call to the nations. But the path to the foreign field will not be direct or easy. A bitter, unexpected delay is waiting just around the corner, which will test the very commitment she has just made. The bitter cup, rejection, delay, and the crucible of preparation. Listen now to the quiet, rhythmic sound of pain, not the external clang of factory work or the bustle of a missionary training center, but the internal, sharp, insistent throb of nerve pain. This is the unwelcome constant in Amy Carmichael's life, a physical frailty that stood in stark contrast to the enormous spiritual strength of her calling. The unwelcome companion, neuralgia's tyranny. Having surrendered her life entirely to God at the Keswick Convention, a moment of incandescent clarity and commitment, Amy was ready to go immediately to the mission field. Her heart was ablaze, her mind was resolved, and her administrative skills, honed during her work with mill girls in Belfast, were polished. She anticipated a swift dispatch to the front lines of global evangelism. Yet, immediately following her clear call, she was faced with a period of disappointment and profound struggle. The obstacle was not spiritual apathy or financial lack, but a chronic physical condition that would serve as her unwanted companion for her entire life. Neuralgia. Neuralgia is a complex nerve disease characterized by sudden, sharp, and severe pain along the path of a nerve. For Amy, this chronic illness was deeply debilitating, often leaving her exhausted, unable to concentrate, and frequently bedridden. It was a constant, unwelcome challenge to her physical capacity for service. The physical toll, the recurrent, unpredictable attacks of pain, did more than cause discomfort. They severely limited her endurance. A day of travel, a strenuous language study session, or even long hours of prayer could be derailed by the sudden onset of incapacitating agony. The mental fray. Beyond the physical, the constant battle required immense mental and emotional energy, leaving less for the work she was desperate to do. It was a relentless lesson in managing limited reserves. Imagine the spiritual conflict, a soul burning with zeal for the unreached, trapped within a body that often failed to obey her will. She faced the intense, quiet frustration of having a world-sized call and a body-sized limitation. This constant tension created the first great trial of her faith, accepting that her ability to serve was not based on her strength, but on God's provision in her weakness. The China Inland Mission. Rejection. A crushing blow. With her sights set on reaching the millions Taylor had spoken of, Amy first applied to the China Inland Mission, CIM, the very organization that had inspired her global vision. She saw herself among the pioneers, enduring the rugged life alongside the missionaries she admired. The CIM, under the intensely practical and disciplined guidance of its founder, Hudson Taylor, required its missionaries to pass a rigorous health examination. This was not a test of spiritual fervor, but a cold assessment of physical suitability for the demanding life of a pioneer in a challenging foreign field. The result of that examination was a devastating yet predictable rejection. The mission board, reviewing her medical history and her chronic battle with neuralgia, concluded that her poor health rendered her unfit for the severe physical demands of pioneer missionary work in China's often harsh climate and rugged terrain. They feared that sending her would risk both her passing and the mission's resources, a justifiable, if heartbreaking, administrative decision. This rejection was a bitter cup for Amy Carmichael to drink. It was a direct, formal contradiction of the profound, clear call she had received from God. She felt the painful sting of human judgment based on physical weakness, despite the spiritual strength she knew she possessed. The spiritual fire was still burning fiercely, but the physical door to her chosen field was slammed shut. The pain of her body was suddenly compounded by the pain of a closed door. In this moment of deep disappointment, she had to wrestle with a fundamental question of faith. Did God truly call me? Or was the conviction at Keswick merely an emotional delusion? The divine calculus, God's strength in weakness. It was precisely in this crucible of disappointment that Amy's faith was refined into its purest form. She turned not to despair, but to the deep, sustaining truth of Holy Scripture. The rejection forced her into a profound reliance on the words of the Apostle Paul, contained in the second epistle to the Corinthians. The passage became her anchor and her personal testimony, the text she would lean on for the next 50 years of service. Text: My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. She clung to this truth, realizing that her chronic pain was not an obstacle to be overcome by sheer human will, but a divine appointment designed to showcase the power of God. The divine paradox. Her weakness was not a defect in her service, but a necessary condition for God's power to be perfectly manifest. The logic was clear. If she was strong and healthy, she might subconsciously rely on her own energy, intelligence, and ability. Because she was chronically ill, she was forced to rely entirely on the sufficiency of God's grace for every single day of service. This rejection was, paradoxically, the start of her greatest preparation. This lesson in dependence was essential preparation. God was showing her that the mission field requires broken, reliant vessels, not self-sufficient heroes. The CIM may have rejected her body, but God accepted her surrendered will, promising to supply the strength needed for the unknown journey ahead. The long, winding path to her ultimate ministry in India began with this radical acceptance of her physical limitation as a platform for God's glory. Perseverance and the new path, an eastern direction. Amy accepted the rejection from the CIM as God's sovereign direction, though it was profoundly painful. She persevered, refusing to allow the closed door of China to negate the universal call to missions. The experience forced her to become flexible, tenacious, and utterly focused on the giver of the call rather than the location of the assignment. She sought out other organizations and other fields, determined to serve wherever her body, frail as it was, could function. Her mentor, Robert Wilson, continued to provide essential counsel and faith, assuring her that a door would open where God intended her to be. The delay, the physical suffering, and the rejection were all integral parts of her spiritual education. They taught her the patience of faith and the profound mystery of suffering in service. She learned that the path to God's will is often winding, and that a setback in human planning is often a setup for divine intervention. The neuralgia, this unwelcome companion, would remain a constant reminder that her life and her work were held entirely by the power of Christ, making every day of active ministry a living miracle. The initial sting of the CIM rejection subsides now, replaced by the quiet resolve of surrender. Amy Carmichael has accepted the terms of her service: weakness, dependence, and the need to wait on the perfect timing of God. She rises now from the disappointment, her eyes fixed not on the closed door to China, but on the vast, open world. A new, unexpected path is about to open, leading her away from the industrial smoke of Belfast toward the vibrant, unfamiliar shores of the rising sun. Her next destination will be Japan, Sunrise Land, a brief stop in Japan. Listen now to the unfamiliar sounds of a distant shore, the rhythmic clanging of a ship's bell, the cry of a seagull, and the sudden, sweet, metallic clang of a gong from a nearby temple. Amy Carmichael has arrived in the Sunrise Land, Japan. This is her first taste of the mission field, a world away from the familiar drizzle of Ireland. The unfamiliar shore. After the disappointment of the China Inland Mission rejection, Amy was ready to follow the next open door, determined that her physical frailty would not stop her spiritual zeal. The next door opened unexpectedly to Japan, a land of profound, ancient beauty and deeply complex spiritual traditions. Her journey began in 1892. Imagine her first impression of this island nation. It was a place of vivid contrasts, the disciplined, exquisite order of the landscape set against the overwhelming foreignness of the language, the customs, and the spiritual atmosphere. This was not the rough, industrial poverty of Belfast. It was a world of intricate, delicate culture entirely new to her. Her time in Japan was short, yet intensely formative. It was a necessary lesson in cultural adaptation and a test of her commitment to humility in ministry. She quickly realized that effective missions required more than just preaching the gospel. It required stripping away layers of her own cultural assumptions and becoming, as the Apostle Paul described, all things to all people, that she might by all means save some. The lesson of identification. The key spiritual lesson of her time in Japan was the necessity of identification with the people she was serving. For Amy, this translated into an immediate and practical act of self-denial. She recognized that her Western dress, the heavy wools and restrictive corsets typical of Victorian fashion, was not only physically restrictive in the climate, but also served as a profound cultural barrier. It marked her as an outsider, a colonial presence, a figure of suspicion and separation. The garment of choice for Japanese women was the kimono, a graceful, practical and culturally appropriate form of dress. In a decisive act of humility, Amy adopted the Japanese dress. She deliberately set aside the comfortable, familiar garb of her Irish background and chose to clothe herself in the garments of the people she sought to reach. This was a simple but radical choice. The wearing of Japanese dress, kimono, was a profound signal of cultural humility. It communicated to the people, without a single word, that she had come not to impose her own culture, but to serve them within the context of their own society. It was a tangible, day-to-day surrender of her own comfort and cultural pride for the sake of the gospel. The difficulty of the climate Japan, however beautiful, presented severe challenges that quickly exposed the continuing reality of her chronic illness. The changing climate and the demands of adapting to a new environment proved to be a constant physical strain. The neuralgia, the unwanted companion from Ireland, flared up under the unfamiliar conditions. She struggled with persistent pain and fatigue, a clear reminder that her strength was not her own. Her time in Japan became a renewed test of the promise she had claimed earlier. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Every day of service required a dependence on God that went beyond mere theory. It was a physical necessity. This difficulty forced her to acknowledge that the mission field is not always where one wishes to be, but where one can function effectively within God's sovereign design. Her passion was unwavering, but her body's capacity for sustained work in the Japanese climate was limited. Stepping out in faith. Despite the physical struggle, Amy's brief service in Japan was marked by a tenacious spirit of stepping out in faith. She learned the language, engaged in evangelistic work, and poured her limited energy into local ministry. The experience gave her confidence in her ability to navigate a totally foreign world, affirming the authenticity of her global call. She learned to communicate the simple gospel message across vast cultural divides, finding that the heart of man, whether Irish or Japanese, was equally in need of Christ's salvation. Her tenure in Japan was short, but it taught her a crucial lesson in the sovereignty of God. She had intended to go to China, but God had directed her to Japan. Now, the difficulty of the Japanese climate and her health issues suggested that even this path was not her final destination. God was using the challenges to steer her, guiding her not just to a mission field, but to the exact mission field for which she was uniquely prepared. The image of Amy Carmichael, dressed in the unfamiliar kimono, fades now. She is readying for the next leg of her journey, a woman who has willingly shed the garments of her home culture for the sake of the gospel. Her short stop in the Sunrise Land served its purpose. She learned humility, she embraced identification, and she confirmed that her persistent physical weakness was simply the stage for God's perfect strength. Now, illness will force another move, another detour, setting the compass toward a final, permanent destination in the vast, sun-drenched subcontinent of India. The final, life-defining chapter of her ministry is about to begin. The compass turns. Destination: India. Listen now to the steady, deep pulse of the ocean beneath a wooden hull, the sound of a ship moving with quiet determination across vast, uncharted waters. This journey is not merely geographical. It is a spiritual redirection forced by human frailty, yet guided by divine sovereignty. The mid-voyage reflection. Amy Carmichael's time in Japan though deeply valuable for the lessons it taught about cultural identification and dependence on God, was cut short by the persistent demands of her neuralgia. The climate and the rigors of missionary life proved too much for her fragile health. The chronic illness, which had caused her to be rejected by the China Inland Mission, now forced her to leave her post in the Sunrise Land. Imagine her on the deck of the ship, looking back at the receding shoreline. There must have been a natural sense of discouragement, even confusion. She had surrendered everything to follow God's call, only to be repeatedly met with closed doors and physical limitations. This moment on the open sea became a crucible of faith, forcing her to grapple with the mystery of a sovereign God who guides his servants through unexpected paths. Her journey became a series of short, unintended stops. The immediate necessity of recovery led her briefly to Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon. This short interlude offered a change of climate and a respite from the intense demands of the mission field, giving her body a chance to regain some measure of strength. Yet, Amy's heart remained fixed on the ultimate goal, serving the unreached. She knew that her rest was temporary and that the next true destination awaited. She prayed not for ease, but for a clear sign of where God intended her to plant her life and pour out her service. The hand of providence. The spiritual lesson of this long, reflective journey was the absolute truth of God's sovereign leading. Amy realized that her path was not determined by her own choice of field, but by the subtle, persistent hand of providence. God was not allowing her to go to China, nor to stay in Japan. He was actively steering her to the precise location for which her entire life, her dark eyes, her disciplined mind, her profound conviction was being prepared. The short stop in Sri Lanka served as the bridge to her final destination. It was here that she received new direction, a quiet assurance, and a commissioning that would send her across the final stretch of ocean. In 1895, after years of waiting, false starts, and physical trials, Amy Carmichael arrived in Madras, India. This was the vast, complex, sun-drenched subcontinent that would become the crucible of her ministry and the setting for her life's great work. She arrived under the auspices of the Church of England Zenana Mission, Zenana being the term for the women's quarters in Indian households, emphasizing a ministry aimed at reaching secluded women. This formal commissioning provided the necessary initial framework and support, but it was clear that Amy's calling would soon lead her into pioneer work that transcended conventional mission structure. A quiet landing picture. The landing, the intense heat, the overwhelming sense, the clamor and density of the crowd, a sensory explosion utterly unlike the quiet greens of Millil or the ordered beauty of Japan. Yet for Amy, there was an immediate, profound sense of arrival. The restlessness of the years of searching and waiting subsided. She was exactly where God intended her to be. The contrast between her early ambition and her final arrival is a powerful statement on surrendered will. She had wanted China, but God provided India. She had wanted strength, but God provided dependence. She had wanted a swift, glorious start, but God provided a winding path of delay and weakness. The end result was a missionary who arrived, not with the pride of self-sufficiency, but with the deep humility of one who knew she was a vessel chosen and shaped by sovereign grace. She knew her success would rely entirely on the strength of Christ working through her perpetual weakness. This final arrival in India marked the cessation of the outward journey and the beginning of the great internal journey of her ministry. Her physical body, with its dark eyes and complexion, was perfectly suited to the environment and the people. The seemingly trivial detail of her childhood prayer was now understood as a strategic preparation for a lifetime of work in this land. The closed doors and the open way. The theme of this chapter rests entirely on the sovereignty of God in closing doors. For Amy, closed doors were not failures. They were God's clear signposts. The rejection from the CIM and the forced departure from Japan were both painful, but they were precisely the necessary steps that directed her to the Tinnevelly District of South India, the place where she would found the Dohnavur Fellowship. The discouragement on the ship, the confusion over the path, all gave way to the absolute conviction that her life was being led by a God who makes no mistakes. She was ready now to move beyond the evangelistic work that characterized her initial years and encounter the stark, horrific reality of the spiritual darkness that permeated the land. The quiet discipline of the Irish linen home, the fire of conviction in Belfast, the spiritual surrender at Keswick, the patience of chronic illness, and the lesson of humility in Japan. All of these elements had culminated in this one moment, this final, quiet landing on the shore of India. The rhythmic sound of the ocean journey fades completely now, replaced by the persistent, humming sounds of a vast, waiting continent. Amy Carmichael steps off the boat and onto the soil of her life's destiny. The vastness of India awaits, and with it, a darkness so profound that it will instantly transform her understanding of missions and demand a courage she has not yet been asked to display. The work of the evangelist is about to give way to the terrifying, immediate need of the rescuer. Things as they are, facing the darkness. Listen now to the quiet, subtle shifting of the night air, carrying not the scent of ocean salt, but the heavy, unfamiliar fragrance of incense and distant temple bells. Amy Carmichael is now settled in South India, focused on evangelistic work. But an unsettling discovery is about to draw her gaze from the light of her ministry to the deep, hidden darkness of the culture around her. Early evangelistic work. In the initial years of her ministry in the Tinnevelly District of South India, Amy's work centered on the established mission practice of evangelism and teaching, primarily among the women in the region. She traveled, taught, and shared the gospel message, often using her carefully cultivated cultural humility, including her adoption of Indian dress, to gain access and build trust. Her focus was on the eternal truth of Christ, bringing the hope of salvation to people steeped in ancient, often fearful religious practices. She documented her observations in her early writings, giving them the chilling title, Things as They Are. This title was a firm declaration of her commitment to face reality without the comforting veil of sentimentality. She refused to romanticize the spiritual landscape. She reported the profound, stark reality of the need for the gospel. Yet, even with her clear-eyed realism, a profound and horrifying truth about the society was concealed from her. A specific evil so entrenched in the religious framework that it was accepted as normal life. This truth would instantly, brutally shatter her focus on conventional evangelism and launch her into a lifelong mission of rescue. The unsettling discovery. Through her close contact with local women, Amy began to hear hushed, incomplete stories, whispers of tragedy and exploitation that centered on the Hindu temples. The details were vague and difficult for her Western mind to fully grasp, but the consistent thread was one of innocence betrayed and childhood lost. She discovered the existence of the Devadasi system. This term literally means servant of the deity. On the surface, it appeared to be a religious custom where young girls were dedicated to the service of a specific temple god or goddess. The reality, Amy quickly learned, was entirely different. The dedication of these girls was, in practice, a ritual form of exploitation and prostitution. These young girls, often taken from poor families under the guise of religious honor or even purchased, were forced into a life of sexual slavery within the temple premises and beyond. They were denied a normal childhood, stripped of their right to marriage and a family, and subjected to a life of continuous abuse. This system was an accepted part of the religious and social structure, viewed not as sin, but as a consecrated, necessary ritual. The reality of spiritual darkness. The shock of this discovery struck Amy with the force of an earthquake. The evil was not hidden in the dark corners of the city, but sanctioned and celebrated in the supposed house of holiness. The spiritual darkness she had come to combat was not merely apathy or disbelief. It was a profound, systematic corruption that devoured the most innocent members of society. This realization fundamentally changed the way Amy viewed her ministry. The problem was no longer just about preaching to adults. It was about rescuing children from immediate, physical, and spiritual destruction. The needs of the soul and the needs of the body had suddenly merged into one overwhelming, urgent imperative. Imagine the struggle of her soul, the years of disciplined, ordered faith, the careful study of theology, and the calm, intellectual commitment to missions, now confronted with a reality that demanded radical, immediate, and law-breaking action. This was the moment of spiritual metamorphosis. Amy could not, in good conscience, continue only with organized evangelism when children were being actively imprisoned and destroyed in the name of religion just steps away. Her profound Christian compassion, forged by her experience with the beggar woman in Belfast, now demanded an infinitely greater sacrifice. The discovery shifted her role from that of a conventional evangelist to a rescuer. She recognized that for these children, the gospel of salvation had to be demonstrated first through the gospel of deliverance, physical freedom and protection. The need for courage. Facing this system of exploitation required not just faith, but immense physical and moral courage. The temples were powerful institutions, often protected by local customs, law, and influential members of the community. To interfere with the dedication or the life of a Devadasi was to directly challenge a deeply rooted religious and social structure. It was an act of open defiance that invited persecution, legal action, and physical threats. Amy knew that to engage in rescue work would mean facing danger in a state of constant risk. She risked being accused of kidnapping, of desecrating religious tradition, and of disrupting the social order. She risked her own freedom and the mission's stability. The spiritual emphasis here is on the reality of spiritual darkness and the need for courage. Amy understood that evil often hides behind the veil of respectability or ancient tradition. Her commitment to Christ compelled her to tear that veil away and confront reality, regardless of the danger. She realized that the love of Christ is not sentimental. It is fiercely protective of the vulnerable. The calm, measured approach of her early ministry had to be discarded, replaced by a stealthy, courageous reliance on God as her only refuge and shield. The true battle was no longer just for the souls of adults. It was for the singular value of one child's life and innocence. The harsh reality of the Devadasi system settles heavily now, transforming the mission field from a place of teaching into a battleground of rescue. Amy's path is now clear, though terrifying. She awaits a sign, a first opportunity, a single small soul that will require her to put her faith and her life on the line. The quiet evangelist is about to become a fugitive mother. The first spark of hope, the arrival of the first rescued child, is imminent. The spark, the story of Prina. Listen now to a faint, urgent scratching sound at a closed door, followed by a tense, whispered plea from the dark of night. The theoretical choice to become a rescuer has suddenly become a terrifying, immediate reality. The first child has arrived, and the entire mission is about to shift. A night of decision. Amy Carmichael had learned about the horrific reality of the Devadasi system, the ritual exploitation of young girls in the name of temple service. She had faced the intellectual and moral imperative to act, knowing such action would invite immense danger and opposition from powerful forces. Now, the conviction in her heart was about to be put to the ultimate test of courage. The sound that broke the quiet of that night was the arrival of Prina, a 7-year-old girl, terrified and alone, who had managed to escape the custody of the temple officials and sought refuge at the mission house. Her presence was not a request. It was a desperate, immediate demand for protection. Imagine the tension in that hushed scene. Amy knew that taking Prina in was not simply an act of charity, but an act of legal defiance. By sheltering a child dedicated to a temple, she was intervening in a powerful religious institution and risking accusations of kidnapping, a charge that could lead to immediate imprisonment and the swift collapse of her entire ministry. This moment forced a singular, profound question. Was one soul worth the risk of losing everything? The singular value of one soul. Amy Carmichael's immediate, unhesitating decision was a profound affirmation of the singular value of one soul in the eyes of God. She looked at the small, fragile girl, clutching desperately to her clothing, and saw not a complication, but a soul for whom Christ gave his life. The entire system of salvation, the sacrifice of the Son of God on the cross, was designed to rescue the individual. The theological conviction that drove her was this: if Christ left the 99 to seek the one lost sheep, then she must risk her security and her reputation to protect this one child. The love of Christ, which she had committed her life to share, was not an abstract doctrine. It was a compelling force that demanded action over fear, compassion over caution. She recognized that if she turned Prina away, that child would be instantly condemned to a life of abuse and spiritual darkness. The moment was absolute. There was no middle ground, only rescue or rejection. Amy chose rescue. The decision was quiet, resolute, and final. Prina was brought inside, hidden, sheltered, and loved. This act of immediate, radical obedience marked the true beginning of Amy Carmichael's life work. Compelled by Calvary's love, Amy's action was driven by a deep understanding of Calvary's love. The cross of Christ was the ultimate demonstration of God's willingness to pay the highest possible price, the life of His Son, to redeem lost individuals. If she truly believed in the infinite cost of redemption, then no cost on her part could be too great for the sake of a single soul. The protection of Prina was an immediate, tangible demonstration of Christ's love in action, a visible gospel lived out under the cover of night. This small, terrified girl became the spark that ignited the great work of the Dohnavur Fellowship. The risk she took was immense. Local adversaries, particularly temple priests and those who profited from the Devadasi system, would spare no effort to reclaim the child. They would deploy every means, legal action, false accusations, physical threats, to ensure their system of exploitation remained intact and unchallenged. For Amy, this meant living every day under the shadow of potential arrest and the constant need for spiritual and physical vigilance. The mother and the fugitive. The arrival of Prina immediately transformed Amy's role. She was no longer simply an evangelist giving sermons. She was now a fugitive mother, protecting a child from powerful, vengeful institutions. The mission house, previously a place of quiet teaching, was transformed overnight into a secret sanctuary. The need for stealth and absolute secrecy became paramount. Any leak of information, any hint of the rescue, would immediately bring the full weight of the local authorities down upon them. Amy had to rely entirely on the absolute fidelity of the few trustworthy local Christians who understood the gravity of the situation. The spiritual lesson here is a profound one. The love of Christ compels action over fear. Amy's choice was not merely humanitarian. It was fundamentally theological. It demonstrated that a life consecrated to God cannot stand by idly while the innocent are destroyed. Prina's quiet presence, her small hand held firmly in Amy's, became the living, breathing proof of God's willingness to intervene in the darkest corners of the world. She was the tangible anchor for Amy's entire future ministry, forcing her to dedicate her life not to distant evangelism, but to the immediate needs of rescue. The immediate challenges included providing safety, comfort, and the necessary emotional and spiritual healing for a 7-year-old girl who had known only trauma and fear. The simple act of providing a safe place to sleep, regular food, and unwavering affection became the first necessary steps of the gospel. The small, fearful whimpers of Prina fade now, replaced by the reassuring, quiet breathing of a child finally held safe. Amy Carmichael holds the child close, her initial moment of fear transcended by the profound, sustaining joy of rescue. The fugitive mother has found her purpose. The sanctuary is established, though its walls are thin and the threat is real. She has defied the darkness for the sake of one. Now, she must build a permanent refuge, a star of hope that can hold not just one child, but hundreds. The Dohnavur Fellowship is about to be born out of this single, courageous act of love. Star of Hope, founding Dohnavur. Listen now to the quiet, persistent sound of a hammer and chisel, not breaking stone, but shaping a foundation. This is the sound of a sacred work commencing, the deliberate, prayerful creation of a formal sanctuary. The desperate rescue of Prina demanded a permanent answer, a star of hope rising in the deep darkness. The imperative for permanence. The successful, courageous rescue of the first child, Prina, instantly revealed the overwhelming scope of the evil against which Amy Carmichael was contending. It confirmed that her ministry could no longer be a temporary stealth operation. It required a formal, permanent, and spiritually anchored refuge, a place of total safety and Christian upbringing for the children she knew would follow. The mission house, which had served as a temporary hiding place, was insufficient for the long-term protection and rehabilitation of a growing number of rescued girls. The risks were too high, the opposition too fierce, and the need for a dedicated Christian home too vital. Amy's vision was not simply to house children, but to create a family, a spiritual community where the rescued girls could learn about the profound, sacrificial love of Christ, a love that would heal the deepest wounds of exploitation and betrayal. The name and the place. The search for the perfect location led her to the Tinnevelly District of South India, a region known for its intense heat and deeply rooted spiritual traditions. The specific place chosen was Dohnavur. The name Dohnavur itself carried a quiet spiritual significance. It was an area with roots connected to early German missionary efforts in the region, a subtle nod to the fact that the work of God builds upon the sacrifice and foundation laid by previous faithful servants. Amy was not starting something entirely new, but planting her flag firmly in the soil consecrated by previous gospel labor. The actual founding of the Dohnavur Fellowship was achieved through resolute prayer and practical, immediate action. Imagine Amy standing on the chosen ground, dedicating the land and the future ministry to God's purpose alone. This was not a business venture. It was a spiritual commitment, a total reliance on God to establish the refuge and sustain it against powerful human and spiritual adversaries. The communal, family-like nature. The Dohnavur Fellowship was founded upon one core, revolutionary principle. It was to be a Christian home above all else, not an orphanage or an institution. Amy insisted on a communal, family-like nature for the growing number of children. The spiritual ethos of the fellowship was centered on the concept of total identification with the children and Indian culture. This meant Indian dress. All missionaries and children wore Indian clothing, primarily the sari, which was practical, modest, and a symbol of solidarity. Indian food. The diet was simple and completely local, reflecting the culture and preventing a sense of Western superiority or separation. Indian life. The entire structure of the day, the language, the customs, the atmosphere, was designed to make the children feel they were in a normal, respected Indian home, albeit one founded on Christ. This protected them from the alienation often experienced in Western-run institutions. Amy established an iron rule that the missionaries would never speak of going home to England or Ireland, thereby ensuring the children understood that Dohnavur was the permanent, unwavering home of everyone there, including Amy herself. This absolute commitment fostered deep trust and security in children who had known only betrayal and impermanence. God establishing a refuge. The founding of Dohnavur was a profound demonstration of God establishing a refuge. The spiritual work of the fellowship was defined by its commitment to gospel saturation. The children were not only rescued physically, they were immersed daily in the teachings of Christ. Daily scripture. The Bible was read and taught multiple times a day in the local language, ensuring the children's minds were filled with truth to counteract the lies and fear of their past. Worship and prayer. Corporate and personal prayer was the constant, necessary rhythm of the home, acknowledging the deep spiritual warfare they faced. Education and skill. The children received excellent education and practical skills training, preparing them to live independent, dignified lives, entirely free from the shadows of their origins. Amy's primary spiritual task was to show these children that the abuse they suffered was a consequence of the darkness of sin, but that Christ's love was a cleansing, healing light that covered all past trauma. She aimed to raise them as strong, committed Christians who would, in turn, become missionaries to their own people. The fellowship grew not by aggressive fundraising, but by the same quiet, believing prayer that built the Welcome Hall in Belfast. Amy continued her policy of absolute dependence, refusing to take a salary or solicit funds publicly. The provision for the ever-increasing number of children arrived, as always, through the unseen hand of God, demonstrating that the work was His alone. The challenge of growth. As the news of the sanctuary spread, the numbers of children, primarily young girls rescued from temple life, but later including young boys rescued from other forms of exploitation, grew rapidly. The founding of Dohnavur was not a one-time event. It was a continuous expansion of faith and provision. This constant growth posed logistical and spiritual challenges that tested Amy and her small team every day. They needed more land, more buildings, more food, and more trustworthy co-workers. Yet, the initial, resolute moment of prayer, the total dedication of the work to Christ's preeminence, sustained them through every need. Dohnavur became a tangible, living illustration of God's faithfulness in the face of immense evil. It was a place where despair was transformed into hope, and where the most vulnerable found a permanent home in the love of Christ. The image of the modest first buildings of Dohnavur fades now, leaving the quiet hum of a new, growing family at its center. The sanctuary is established, and the rescue work is in full swing. Amy Carmichael has found her life's work, becoming a mother to hundreds of abandoned souls. But true motherhood is a relentless, exhausting commitment, and the next phase of the story will reveal the profound, sacrificial cost of this love on the heart and energy of the woman the children would soon call Amma. Amma's family, learning the cost of love. Listen now to the quiet, rhythmic sounds of a large household at work. The rustle of cotton, clothing, the soft rhythm of sweeping, and the murmur of children's voices learning scripture in a foreign tongue. This is the daily symphony of Dohnavur, a home built on rescue, and a family forged by a costly, sacrificial love. The new name. As the small initial sanctuary grew into a large communal family, the children needed a name for the woman who was their fierce protector and tender guide. They could not call her by her formal English title, nor was Miss Carmichael adequate for the depth of her relationship to them. She was, in every meaningful sense, their mother, and so the children affectionately began to call her Amma, the word in the local language for mother. This simple, profound title was the highest honor she could receive. It was a recognition that she had willingly taken on the full, tireless burden of motherhood, a love that demanded endless patience, practical service, and total self-abandonment. Amy Carmichael's life was now defined by the reality of being Amma, the mother of hundreds of children who had known only trauma, fear, and exploitation. Her days were a relentless cycle of practical service, ensuring the physical, emotional, and spiritual healing of her vast family, the mundane service of love. The love demonstrated at Dohnavur was not expressed through grand occasional gestures. It was demonstrated in mundane daily service. Amy understood that to heal children who had suffered deep betrayal, love had to be tangible, consistent, and practical. Imagine the work, the constant washing of clothing by hand, essential for a large family in the intense South Indian climate, the relentless organization of meals for hundreds of hungry mouths, the careful tending to illnesses, from simple fevers to complex medical needs. This was a life spent on her feet, tending to the endless, small needs that define a mother's life. She supervised the daily education, ensuring the children learned not only to read and write, but also received rigorous instruction in the Bible. She personally taught them to sing, to pray, and to understand the foundational doctrines of the faith that had redeemed them. Every task, from the most simple chore to the most serious spiritual lesson, was viewed as an act of worship and service to Christ. This tireless mothering required the complete shedding of any lingering Western sensibilities about status or ease. Amy worked side by side with the children and the local staff, demonstrating by example that no task was too lowly when performed for Christ and his little ones. Her commitment to wearing Indian dress, the sari, and living by local customs remained absolute, ensuring that she was truly identified with her family. The theology of compassion. Amy Carmichael often reflected deeply on the source of this tireless, sacrificial love. She knew that her compassion was not a natural human trait that would endure the years of stress and danger. It had to be continually renewed by a divine source. She penned a profound reflection that served as a spiritual plumbline for herself and the missionaries who joined the fellowship. She wrote, "If I have no compassion, I may give all my goods to feed the poor, and I may give my body to be burned, and yet I know nothing of Calvary's love." This quote is a powerful statement on the necessity of motive. It references the Apostle Paul's definition of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, emphasizing that even the ultimate act of sacrifice, giving one's body to be burned, is worthless without the genuine, heartfelt compassion that stems directly from the cross of Christ. Amy understood that Calvary's love was the measure of all true service. Christ's passing was the ultimate act of self-giving, pouring out everything for those who could give nothing in return. Therefore, her work at Dohnavur had to be an imitation of Christ's love, a love that suffers, endures, and sacrifices itself completely for the sake of others. The challenge of motherhood for the rescued children was immense. They brought with them deep emotional scars, behavioral issues stemming from trauma, and a profound inability to trust. It was only through a love that mirrored Christ's unconditional acceptance that these wounds could begin to heal. Sacrifice and self-denial. The daily life of Amma's family at Dohnavur was, in essence, a lesson in sacrifice and abandonment of self. The spiritual health of the community required that Amy and the missionaries constantly renounce their own comfort, preferences, and personal desires. Amy's neuralgia, her constant companion, made every physical act a struggle, yet she rarely complained, choosing to accept her weakness as the condition for God's perfect strength. The intense heat, the endless noise of a large family, and the constant fear of opposition all were absorbed into her life as part of the price of love. She became a living, breathing demonstration that sacrificial love is tireless. It does not quit when it is exhausted, nor does it retreat when the work is messy. It is a love that commits itself fully to the long, slow, difficult process of restoration. The children, seeing this level of unwavering devotion, understood the gospel in a way that mere words could never convey. They saw the love of Christ made visible in the tireless devotion of their mother. This was the ultimate pedagogy, teaching the gospel through a life poured out. The sounds of daily service at Dohnavur are quiet now. The sound of a mother's tired yet grateful sigh at the end of a long, selfless day. Amy Carmichael, the evangelist, has become Amma, the mother, demonstrating the very core of the gospel. This costly, consistent love is the ultimate defense against the forces seeking to reclaim the children. But the peace of the compound is fragile. The dedication to the children means that the forces of opposition, the temple authorities, and local adversaries have not vanished. They are gathering, and they will soon launch an attack that threatens to break the very foundations of the fellowship. A dark valley of opposition and fear awaits. The dark valley, opposition and accusations. Listen now to the hushed sounds of the night, not the gentle rhythm of the household, but the eerie silence of a watched place, the subtle creak of a distant gate. The Dohnavur Fellowship is a star of hope, but every light casts a deep, aggressive shadow. The quiet work of love is now faced with the menacing reality of persecution. The nature of the threat. Amy Carmichael's commitment to the sacrificial love of Amma's family was not a private devotion. It was an open challenge to the spiritual and social powers entrenched in the Tinnevelly District. By rescuing children from the Devadasi system, she was directly interfering with the financial, social, and religious infrastructure of the local temples and the individuals who profited from the exploitation. This ministry of rescue meant that constant opposition was not merely a possibility. It was a daily, unavoidable reality. The adversaries were not disorganized bandits. They were often powerful temple priests, local figures of authority, and influential members of the community whose reputation and wealth depended on the continued flow of young girls into the system. The threat was multi-layered, designed to attack the fellowship from every direction: legal, physical, and emotional. Accusations of kidnapping. The primary and most dangerous weapon used against Amy and the missionaries was the accusation of kidnapping. Since the children were often formally dedicated to the temple gods, removing them was framed not as rescue, but as theft and religious interference. Imagine the dramatic, hushed scenes. Local adversaries or temple priests, often accompanied by officials or sometimes angry mobs, would appear at the gates of Dohnavur, demanding the return of specific children. The atmosphere would be charged with tension, the fate of the entire fellowship hanging precariously on every word and action. Amy was forced to engage in a constant, stressful spiritual and legal defense. She had to maintain meticulous records of every rescue, every testimony, and every interaction to prove that the children came to Dohnavur willingly, seeking refuge from a life of bondage. This constant state of legal siege was immensely taxing, requiring immense spiritual fortitude to face down powerful, corrupt men who were determined to see her imprisoned. The threat was very real. If Amy was successfully convicted of kidnapping, her ministry would be instantly dissolved, the children would be returned to their abusers, and she herself would face a long solitary imprisonment far from the family she had built. The fear of being imprisoned for her compassion was a constant, chilling companion. The spiritual shield. It was in this dark valley of opposition and accusations that Amy's profound reliance on prayer proved to be the absolute necessary spiritual shield. She did not fight the legal battles with human cunning, nor the physical threats with armed guards. Her warfare was fought primarily on her knees. The core of the Dohnavur method was the unwavering belief that God was their refuge in times of trouble. The missionaries and the older children would gather frequently for resolute prayer, lifting up the names of the persecutors, interceding for protection, and anchoring themselves in the sovereignty of God. The reliance on God was not passive. It was an active spiritual force that transcended their very real fear. Amy recognized that the true battle was not against flesh and blood, not against the priests or the lawyers, but against the spiritual forces of darkness that fueled the exploitation. This faith was demonstrated in the missionaries' commitment to non-violence and persistent courage. They refused to be intimidated, maintaining the home as a place of open truth and quiet, disciplined Christian life, even when threatened with violence. Faith, overcoming fear. The experience of living under threat taught Amy and the entire fellowship a profound lesson in faith overcoming fear. Fear, she taught, was a tool of the enemy, designed to paralyze and stop the work of God. True faith, on the other hand, was the quiet determination to proceed with love and service, even when the consequences were clear and dangerous. Amy often reflected on the scriptural promises of God's protection, internalizing the Psalms that speak of the Lord being a strong tower and a shelter from the storm. Her confidence was not in the weak protection of the British legal system, nor in the strength of walls, but in the immutability of God's promise to protect His own work and His children. This reliance on God as a refuge required extraordinary vulnerability. They were admitting that they were incapable of protecting themselves against the power arrayed against them. This very admission of human weakness was the stage upon which God often chose to display His perfect strength, frequently intervening in court cases, turning back threats, and confounding the plans of their adversaries. The persecution, though painful, served a vital spiritual purpose. It purified the motives of the fellowship. It ensured that only those missionaries who were fully consecrated and willing to face danger would remain, and it deepened the children's understanding that their protection was a daily miracle granted by the hand of their Heavenly Father. The intense tension of the confrontation fades now, replaced by the quiet confidence of a soul anchored in God. The missionary and the rescued child are safe, not because of their own strength, but because of the spiritual shield that surrounds the work of Dohnavur. Amy Carmichael and her family have endured the dark valley of opposition, learning that the true price of love is not just self-sacrifice, but the courage to face danger without flinching. Her heart is now more deeply committed than ever, understanding that her life must be entirely poured out for the sake of the gospel. This commitment will soon be crystallized into a powerful guiding principle that defines the very essence of missionary life. An iron rule: life as a chance to perish. Listen now to the quiet, rhythmic scratching of a pen across paper, an act performed not in a bustling office, but in the deep silence of a missionary's room. Amy Carmichael is writing a letter, but within that simple correspondence lies a profound, uncompromising principle, a spiritual axiom that defines the cost of following Christ. The Missionary Inquirer. The fame of Dohnavur as a sanctuary of faith and courage inevitably attracted the attention of young men and women in England and elsewhere who felt the call to missions. They were drawn by the heroic nature of the rescue work and the clear, miraculous way God had provided for the fellowship. They wrote to Amy, seeking advice, encouragement, and guidance for their own missionary aspirations. It was in response to one such eager, prospective missionary candidate that Amy articulated what became known as her iron rule of service. The candidate, perhaps looking for a formula for success or a guarantee of divine protection and ease, was instead given a stark, beautiful truth that cut straight to the core of Christian discipleship. Amy's reply was uncompromising, a profound theological statement disguised as practical advice. It was designed to separate those with romantic notions of missions from those with a radical, sacrificial commitment to Christ. The famous dictum. Imagine the recipient reading the words penned by Amy in the quiet of her Indian mission home. The central dictum was arresting, demanding an immediate re-evaluation of one's purpose. A life given to mission is simply a chance to perish. This was not a statement about physical danger, though that was certainly present in the Tinnevelly District. It was a statement about spiritual reality. To understand this iron rule, one must understand the context of the New Testament teaching on abandonment of self. Amy was referencing the foundational teaching of Christ, who said that anyone who desires to follow him must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow him. She was echoing the words of the Apostle Paul, who wrote in the Epistle to the Philippians, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to depart is gain." Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. The phrase, "a chance to perish," meant death to ambition. It was the end of all personal ambition, the refusal to seek fame, personal comfort, or professional success. The missionary's career path was now simply the path of obedience. Death to rights. It was the end of personal rights and preferences, the willingness to give up one's food, one's sleep, one's privacy, and one's cultural identity for the sake of others. It meant letting go of the right to health and security, embracing the neuralgia and the constant opposition as part of the chosen sacrifice. Death to self-glory. It was the complete renunciation of the desire for earthly reward or recognition. The true reward was Christ alone, and the ultimate goal was simply to be spent entirely for his glory. The true meaning of the cross. Amy's rule reframed the entire concept of missionary service. The mission field was not a place to find a more exciting life. It was a place to live out the profound truth of the cross, a life laid down. She was essentially teaching that self-denial is not a preliminary step to Christian life, but the continuous, necessary condition of service. The life of a missionary, particularly one involved in the deep spiritual warfare of rescue, must be characterized by an hourly, conscious choice to crucify the old self, the desires for comfort, ease, and recognition. This principle was vividly demonstrated in the daily life of Dohnavur. The missionaries ate the same simple food, wore the same simple clothes, and lived with the same risks as the rescued children. They were not elevated figures. They were servants in permanent surrender. Their lives were, by design, poured out like a drink offering. The acceptance of this iron rule was the ultimate test of sincerity for those wishing to join the fellowship. Amy wanted no one who came seeking satisfaction for their own spiritual pride or romantic adventure. She only accepted those who were willing to embrace the hard, joyful reality of taking up one's cross. Complete surrender and sacrifice. The spiritual focus here is on complete surrender and sacrifice. Amy Carmichael understood that the forces of darkness she faced could only be fought by a life that had already accepted its own ending. You cannot threaten a person who has already accepted that they have no right to their own life. This freed her from the fear of persecution and the threat of passing away, which had haunted her during the dark valley. Her own life served as an example. She had already put aside her inheritance to her culture, to her health, and to her right to live a quiet life. This dictum was simply the theological summary of the choices she had already made, choices that had empowered her to confront the horrific evil of the temple system. The result of embracing this sacrificial ethic was not despair, but a profound, enduring joy. When a life is fully surrendered to Christ, it is filled with the unshakable certainty that to depart is gain. The missionary is truly free when they have nothing left to lose. The principle of a life given to mission is simply a chance to perish became the spiritual DNA of the Dohnavur Fellowship. It fostered a culture of profound selflessness, unwavering commitment, and a focus that was utterly fixed on the glory of God and the salvation of souls, rather than on personal comfort or mission success. The rhythmic scratching of the pen ceases now. The letter is sealed, carrying a truth more powerful than any sermon. The young candidate has received not encouragement for an easy life, but the radical truth that makes a fruitful life possible. Amy Carmichael has codified her sacrifice into a single, profound truth. She has always been a woman of powerful words, and the next phase of her life will see her transform her immense experiences into a quiet, enduring legacy that will reach millions beyond the walls of Dohnavur through the ministry of writing. Gold cord and lotus buds. The writer's heart. Listen now to the quiet, subtle sound of a small lamp burning low, its warm glow illuminating a writing table in the late Indian night. The daily clamour of Amma's family at Dohnavur has subsided, and a new ministry is quietly taking shape. The enduring, powerful ministry of the written word. The necessity of the pen. Amy Carmichael was, first and foremost, a woman of relentless action, a rescuer, a mother, and a shepherd. Yet she possessed a profound literary gift. She quickly realized that her unique, courageous work in the Tinnevelly District could not be confined to the physical boundaries of Dohnavur. The world needed to know the reality of the spiritual darkness and the miracle of God's provision. Her pen became an essential ministry tool, extending her influence far beyond the walls of the fellowship. Her writing was not a hobby, but an overflow of her conviction. It was a means to inform the global church, to inspire others to sacrifice, and to secure the prayer support vital for the continuation of the dangerous rescue work. Imagine her, writing late at night, transforming the immense stress and spiritual gravity of her daily life into clear, measured prose. Her letters and manuscripts were crafted with the same precision and dedication that she brought to every other task, a disciplined mind focused entirely on the glory of God. The prolific output, Amy, became a prolific writer, publishing numerous books, devotionals, and collections of verse that profoundly impacted the Western Church. Her works provided an unflinching look at the reality of the mission field, coupling deep theological insight with vivid personal testimony. Two of her most influential books are named after tangible symbols of the children and the mission. Lotus Buds. This was one of her most famous titles, referring to the rescued girls themselves. The lotus flower is a symbol of purity and beauty rising out of the mud. The title suggested the spiritual truth that these children, rescued from the filth of the temple system, were transformed by Christ into something beautiful and pure. The book was a powerful, moving plea for the protection of children and a testament to the transformative power of the gospel. The Gold Cord. This work spoke of the unbreakable, strong cord of God's faithfulness that sustained the fellowship through years of opposition, legal threats, and financial need. It was a narrative of the miraculous provision of God, emphasizing the foundational principle of faith reliance that built the Welcome Hall and founded Dohnavur. Her books served as a crucial lifeline for the fellowship. They informed readers not with sensationalism, but with sober spiritual reality. They secured essential prayer and financial support by allowing the distant church to become intimately involved in the trials and triumphs of the Dohnavur family. The purpose: inform and inspire. Amy's primary purpose in writing was never personal fame or financial gain. The royalties from her books were always channeled directly back into the operational needs of the Dohnavur Fellowship. She wrote only to inform and to inspire. She informed the church about things as they are, forcing complacent Christians to confront the reality of the spiritual warfare being fought on the mission field. She provided a clear, spiritual alternative to the idealized, romanticized view of missions that often prevailed in the West. She inspired a generation of young men and women to embrace the iron rule, the principle of abandonment of self, by showing them that the sacrificial life was the most joyous and fruitful life. Her writing resonated because it was not theoretical. It was soaked in the reality of the cross she carried daily, both through her physical pain and the dangers of her work. Her prose was characterized by its spiritual depth and gentle piety. Even when discussing the horrors of the Devadasi system, she maintained a focused emphasis on the sufficiency of God's grace to redeem and restore. Her words were gentle yet sharp, a mirror reflecting the truth of the gospel. An enduring impact. Amy Carmichael recognized that her physical presence was limited, but her written words were not. Her books, her devotional thoughts, and her poems became an enduring ministry tool that continued to work long after her voice had faded. They carried the spiritual DNA of Dohnavur, the absolute preeminence of Christ, the value of the individual soul, and the call to radical consecration across continents and decades. The quiet discipline of the writer's heart was an act of profound faith. It was the decision to use the intellectual gifts God had given her, the ability to articulate truth with clarity and grace, entirely for His glory. Her writing was a form of worship and spiritual warfare, combating darkness with truth and apathy with urgent conviction. She understood that the power of a book is its ability to enter the quiet inner chamber of a person's heart and confront them with the living reality of the gospel. Her words were an invitation to join the cause, not by coming to India, but by deepening one's surrender at home. The quiet glow of the writing lamp begins to dim now. The books are written, the message is sent forth, and the spiritual support for Dohnavur is secured. The pen is put down, and the active work of the mother is done for the night. The impact of her written word is immense, but the tireless pace of her life in service is about to be halted, not by an enemy, but by physical frailty. The woman of constant motion is about to receive her final, profound lesson, the lesson of suffering and stillness. The next chapter will see the rescuer become the one who must be served. The Fall, a lesson in being served. Listen now to a sudden, sharp sound, the unexpected crack of bone, the quick intake of breath, and then a profound silence settling over the busy compound. The woman of tireless action, the mother who was always serving, has been violently stopped. This is the quiet shock of a life's trajectory instantly diverted. The sudden halt. For over 3 decades, Amy Carmichael had operated with immense, almost superhuman energy. Despite the constant, debilitating pain of neuralgia, she had walked hundreds of miles, supervised a vast household of children, fought legal battles, and poured out her life in continuous, demanding service. Her life was defined by motion, vigilance, and fierce, protective activity. Then came the year 1931. In a sudden, unassuming moment, the active life came to an unexpected and abrupt halt. While walking on the grounds of the Dohnavur Fellowship, Amy had a simple, catastrophic accident. She fell into an uncovered pit on the property. The fall was severe. The injury she sustained, a complex fracture and damage to her spine, was crippling. The trauma was significant enough that it could not be easily treated or fully healed in the remote mission setting. This single misstep instantly rendered the tireless rescuer largely bedridden. Imagine the profound, almost dizzying shock. One moment, she was Amma, the mother of hundreds, organizing, teaching, and leading. The next, she was a patient, confined to a small room, entirely reliant on the care of others. The external warfare of rescue was replaced by the intense, internal warfare of acceptance, the difficult realization of helplessness. For a soul as fiercely independent and devoted to selfless service as Amy Carmichael, the transition from server to the served was one of the most difficult spiritual challenges she had ever faced. She who had always given now had to receive. She who had always cared for the weakest now was the one who needed constant, gentle tending. This was a lesson in humility that went deeper than any previous sacrifice. It was easy for her to give away her money and her reputation. It was infinitely harder to give up her ability to work. She had often preached the iron rule. A life given to mission is simply a chance to perish. Now God was demanding the cessation of her practical utility. She had to accept that her physical strength was entirely gone, and that her most dedicated co-workers would now have to dedicate their time and energy to caring for her. The challenge was not only physical pain, but mental acceptance. There must have been moments of frustration, the struggle of watching the immense work of the fellowship continue without her direct, active involvement. The needs of her children, the daily dangers, the fresh rescues went on, but she could only observe from her confined room. Learning patience and humility. The years immediately following the fall became a crucible of patience and humility. Amy was forced to slow down, to be silent, and to wait upon the Lord in a way she never had before. Her energetic faith, which had moved mountains of opposition, was now required to exercise the passive virtues of endurance and submission. This period was essential for her spiritual growth. It taught her a profound truth about ministry. The work of God is not dependent on the energy of the servant, but on the power of the master. She was forced to learn that her greatest value was not in her doing, but in her being, a life fully surrendered, regardless of the physical condition. She accepted this limitation as God's plan in suffering. She concluded that if God had wanted her to continue her rigorous, active life, He would have protected her from the fall. Since He allowed the injury, He clearly had a higher, quieter purpose for her final years. The work of Amma's family was never about Amy Carmichael. It was about Christ's preeminence. The injury forced the entire fellowship to function without its visible, constant human leader, ensuring that the roots of the ministry were firmly established in Christ, not in a single personality. Her weakness became the strength of the institution, proving its divine foundation. Accepting the service of love. The compassion that Amy had poured out on the children was now reflected back to her. The missionaries and the older children, who had been raised in the atmosphere of Calvary's love, now tended to her with profound devotion. It was a beautiful, humbling exchange. Amy, the devoted mother, had to learn to receive their love without resentment or guilt. This required a final, ultimate surrender, the giving up of pride in one's own independence. She understood that by accepting their service, she was allowing her family to live out the very gospel of selfless love that she had spent her life teaching. The confined room, therefore, was not a place of isolation, but a quiet laboratory of grace, where the power of Christ was being made perfect in profound physical weakness. The sudden noise of the fall subsides, and the room settles into a deep, sustained stillness. Amy Carmichael is stationary now, her active years behind her, but her spiritual impact is far from over. The long final chapter of her life is just beginning. She has traded the frantic pace of the rescuer for the quiet power of the intercessor. The confined room is about to become a sanctuary of prayer and wisdom, where her influence will continue to guide, counsel, and inspire the fellowship for the next 2 decades. The ministry of action gives way to the ministry of stillness. The confined room, ministry in stillness. Listen now to the quiet, steady rhythm of slow, deliberate breathing, the sound of a woman who has traded the speed of service for the power of stillness. The confined room is not a prison of suffering, but a sanctuary of deep ministry, where prayer and influence flow outward to the world. The final transition. Following the debilitating fall in 1931, Amy Carmichael began the final, remarkable chapter of her life. For 20 long years, she was largely confined to a small room at the Dohnavur Fellowship, a space that became known affectionately as the sick room. The physical reality was one of significant pain and extreme limitation, yet spiritually, this room became the engine room of the entire mission. The woman who had once traveled widely across Ireland, Japan, and India was now rooted to a single place. The energetic founder was forced to become the intercessor and counselor. This final, great, sacrifice of physical activity revealed the profound truth of the sovereignty of God in suffering. Amy had to reconcile her calling with her condition. She understood that if God, in His perfect wisdom, had chosen to confine her, then the most effective ministry she could possibly have was from that very room. Her focus shifted entirely from the ministry of doing to the ministry of being and praying. The shift to prayer and correspondence. The confined room transformed into a center for two vital, non-physical ministries: prayer and correspondence. The ministry of prayer became her primary work. Amy dedicated her days and often her nights to interceding for the fellowship. She would lie on her bed, holding lists of the hundreds of children by name, praying specifically for their safety, their healing, and their spiritual growth. She prayed for the missionaries who now carried the active burden of leadership, for their protection from opposition, and for the financial needs of the vast family. She realized that prayer was not a passive activity. It was the ultimate work, the spiritual force that sustained the Dohnavur Fellowship against all its adversaries. Her quiet room was the battle headquarters, where the spiritual warfare was fought on her knees. This long-sustained ministry of intercession taught her and the fellowship the spiritual power is often inversely proportional to physical activity. The ministry of correspondence was her way of continuing to lead and inspire. She wrote countless letters filled with spiritual wisdom, gentle counsel, and firm guidance to the missionaries, the older children, and supporters across the globe. These letters maintained the spiritual unity and commitment to the iron rule that defined Dohnavur. Her pen, already trained during her prolific writing period, now became an instrument of pastoral care and long-distance leadership. She was still Amma, guiding her family, but her guidance came from a place of deep, settled rest in God. Continued guidance and influence. Despite her physical removal from the daily running of the fellowship, Amy's influence remained paramount. The leaders who had taken over the administrative and physical duties relied entirely on her deep wisdom and spiritual discernment. She was the spiritual anchor of the community. Her continued presence, though quiet, was a visible, living demonstration of the truth she taught. God is absolutely sufficient, even in the deepest weakness. The children saw their beloved Amma confined and in pain, yet radiating an unshakable peace and devotion, and they learned that true faith is victorious over circumstance. She continued to write and publish devotional books and poetry from her sick room. These works, born out of suffering and stillness, carry a unique weight of authority and comfort. They spoke to those facing trials, assuring them that God meets His children fully and perfectly in the quiet, painful moments of life. The entire episode of her final confinement served as the ultimate test of her principle, Christ's preeminence. Her work did not collapse. In fact, it flourished. This proved, beyond any doubt, that the foundation was not in her own strength, but in the sovereignty of God. The sovereignty of God in suffering. The overarching spiritual theme of this chapter is the sovereignty of God in suffering. Amy Carmichael did not view her pain as a mistake or a curse. She saw it as a divine appointment designed to complete her conformity to Christ. Christ too was confined and limited in His suffering, yet His greatest work was accomplished from that place of utter physical weakness. She accepted the suffering as her final, highest privilege, her final chance to fully live out the iron rule by laying down her independence. She found a profound, active peace in her stillness, a peace that became a sermon to all who visited her room. The confined room, quiet and simple, was the setting for her most powerful sermons, sermons preached through patience, endurance, and unceasing prayer. The quiet sound of prayer in the sick room fades now. For 20 long years, Amy Carmichael has sustained the Dohnavur Fellowship through a ministry of stillness, demonstrating that true strength is found in dependence, and the ultimate work is prayer. Her life of service is drawing to a close, but her final, most profound legacy is yet to be sealed. A final, tangible answer to her life's prayers is about to be granted, providing the perfect, quiet culmination to a life poured out in love. Amma's legacy, a quiet goodbye. Listen now to the sound of a final, gentle exhale, the quiet release of a spirit returning home. The long season of suffering has passed, and the faithful servant, Amma, is ready to rest in the arms of the Master she served with such fierce, sacrificial love. The final answer to prayer, the final years of Amy Carmichael's life, spent in the stillness of her confined room, were sustained by the hope of seeing the ultimate answer to her deepest, most dangerous prayer. Her entire mission was predicated on rescuing children from the Devadasi system, the ritual temple prostitution that was legally and socially entrenched in India. The vast majority of her 20 years of confinement, beginning in 1931, was spent praying not just for the individual children, but for the abolishment of the system itself. This was a systemic spiritual darkness that seemed immovable. Yet, in a powerful demonstration of the sovereignty of God working through prayer and legal channels, the impossible happened. In 1948, the year after India achieved independence, the state of Madras passed the Devadasi Abolition Act. This law legally outlawed the dedication of young girls to Hindu temples and criminalized the practice of temple prostitution. For Amy Carmichael, still confined yet still praying, this was the tangible, glorious answer to the single, most intense petition of her life's work. Her faith, which was built on the premise that God hears and answers the prayers of His people, was affirmed in this monumental legal and spiritual victory. Her life of sacrifice had culminated not just in the rescue of hundreds, but in the ending of an entire system of evil. A quiet passing. After decades of devoted service, both active and silent, Amy Carmichael passed away peacefully in 1951. She had spent 56 years of her life on the mission field in India, a testimony to the sufficiency of God's grace made perfect in her perpetual weakness. She was 74 years old. The passing of Amma was not a moment of despair, but of quiet, settled peace, a homegoing that reflected the disciplined simplicity of her life. She had lived by the iron rule, a chance to perish, and now she had achieved the ultimate gain. In her final instructions, Amy provided a powerful final demonstration of her ultimate focus on Christ and her renunciation of self-glory. She made a specific, humble request regarding her burial. She asked that her gravesite be marked with no gravestone, no monument, and no epitaph bearing her name or recounting her achievements. This was the final, definitive act of her commitment to Christ's preeminence. She did not want the attention of any visitor to be drawn to her work or her sacrifice, but only to the glory of the Lord who had enabled her to serve. The Birdbath Memorial, the devoted family and missionaries of Dohnavur, understanding the profound humility that motivated her request, honored her wish while still providing a loving, gentle place of remembrance. They created a small, simple memorial, fitting for a mother who had poured out her life for the refreshment of the children. They built a bird bath over her gravesite, a quiet, functional place of refreshment for the local creatures. Beneath the bird bath, on a simple stone, they inscribed a single, solitary word: Amma. This final, simple memorial spoke volumes. It was not a tribute to the celebrated missionary or the prolific writer. It was a tribute to the mother, the woman who had chosen the lowest place of service, whose identity was found not in her titles, but in her love for the least of these. The bird bath symbolized a life poured out, offering refreshment and sustenance to all who came near, asking nothing in return. The lasting legacy. Amy Carmichael's life, from the linen fields of Millel to the confined room in Dohnavur, stands as an unshakable testament to the supreme value of God's word and the sufficiency of His grace. Her quiet, lasting legacy is multifaceted. The family. She established the Dohnavur Fellowship as a vibrant, self-sustaining family of faith that continues its work of rescue and nurturing to this day, well over a century after its founding. The principle. She left behind the iron rule, challenging generations of Christians to embrace complete surrender and the costly, joyful reality of abandonment of self. The victory. She was an instrument in the legal abolishment of a horrific system of exploitation, demonstrating the power of persistent, believing prayer. Her life was not a pursuit of grand personal glory, but a quiet, sustained demonstration that when one completely loses their life for Christ's sake, they find it in its fullest, most fruitful expression. The seed of faith planted in Ireland grew into a massive tree of refuge in India. The final image of the bird bath in the warm Indian sun settles now, simple, silent, and offering refreshment. It is the perfect marker for a life poured out in love, drawing all attention away from the servant and toward the sovereign master. The story of Amy Carmichael ends not with a thunderous event, but with the quiet dignity of a life well lived, a testimony to the fact that the ultimate priority is found in understanding and obeying the will of the Creator. Her quiet, lasting influence continues to inspire all who seek to serve with a pure heart and a complete sacrifice. The quiet echo of Amma's legacy. Conclusion. Listen now to the sound of the evening settling over the Tinnevelly District in South India, a gentle quiet descending upon the Dohnavur Fellowship. The sounds of a vast saved family, the laughter of children, the quiet prayers of dedicated hearts, fade into a single, sustained, profound stillness. We have reached the end of our story, the chronicle of Amy Carmichael, the missionary sleep story, the final, sustaining truth. We stand now at the quiet memorial of a life poured out, the simple bird bath, inscribed with the single word, Amma. There is no towering monument here, no grand statue demanding recognition, only a humble basin offering refreshment, a final, perfect reflection of the service it commemorates. It is the chosen symbol of a life lived by the iron rule, a relentless, conscious denial of self, a life that was simply a chance to perish so that Christ might gain the glory. Amy Carmichael's journey from the idyllic disciplined home in Millil, Northern Ireland, to the final quiet room in India, teaches us the fundamental, sustaining truth of the Christian life, that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. She was a woman constantly plagued by neuralgia, rejected by one mission board for her frailty, yet sustained for over 50 years of fierce, uncompromising service by a grace that was always, miraculously, sufficient. Let that truth settle over you now. The God who calls you does not rely on your inherent strength, but on your willingness to be weak, that His power might be perfectly displayed through your brokenness. The seeds of sacrifice. Recall the seeds of faith planted in her youth, the disciplined devotion of the Carmichael home, the early lesson that God's plan is better than our own, a truth revealed in the persistent brown eyes she once wished away, but which became her crucial disguise in India. Remember the first spark of conviction on the gloomy streets of Belfast, the moment she saw the contrast between respectable churchgoers and the destitute Shawleys. She was convicted by the reality of gold, silver, or straw, the imperative to build her life's work with the material of sacrificial love, service offered to the least of these. That initial act of courage led to the founding of the Welcome Hall, a testament built entirely by prayer and faith to proclaim Christ's preeminence. Let the quiet certainty of her prayer life, the total reliance on God to supply every need for the Welcome Hall, bring a deep peace to your own heart. Rest in the knowledge that your own cares, however large, are not too complex for the God who answered Amy Carmichael's quiet appeals with miraculous, tangible provision. The call and the crucible. The clear personal call Amy received at the Keswick Convention, inspired by the words of Hudson Taylor, forced her to trade the comfort of success for the glorious uncertainty of global missions. But the path was not direct. It led her through the crucible of rejection and delay, teaching her patience and dependence. Her brief stop in Japan was a crucial lesson in cultural humility and identification, an embrace of the kimono as a symbol of self-denial. These detours were not mistakes. They were the sovereign leading of a God who gently closed doors to steer her to her final, life-defining destination, India. Let the gentle rocking of that long ship journey, the compass turning toward the east, soothe any anxiety you may have about your own life's unexpected directions. God uses closed doors as surely as open ones to guide us to the place of greatest fruitfulness. Amma and the dark valley. In India, she encountered the chilling reality of the Devadasi system, the truth that shattered conventional evangelism and thrust her into the terrifying work of rescue. The whispered arrival of Preena, the 7-year-old spark, transformed Amy into a fugitive mother, willing to risk everything for the singular value of one soul. This courage, born of Calvary's love, founded the Dohnavur Fellowship, a star of hope rooted in the profound theological truth that true compassion requires total risk. The entire community was founded on the communal, family-like nature of Christ's love, the children calling her Amma. But the act of love invited intense opposition. Remember the dark valley of opposition and accusations, the constant, hushed fear of being imprisoned for kidnapping. Amy stood firm, knowing that her shield was not human law, but the power of prayer and the fierce, protective hand of God. Let the quiet fortitude of her faith stand as a bulwark against any fears that trouble your own mind now. The second half of Amy's life brought the ultimate sacrifice, the fall in 1931, which confined her for the final 20 years of her life. The tireless rescuer was forced into the ultimate act of humility, the lesson in being served. She learned that the greatest ministry is not the ministry of doing, but the ministry of stillness. From her confined room, she continued to serve through unceasing prayer and quiet correspondence. She became the spiritual engine of Dohnavur, proving that the ultimate work is prayer and that God's power is fully available even when we are physically weak. Her enduring literary legacy, contained in works like Lotus Buds and The Gold Cord, carried her unwavering message, the sufficiency of God's grace, to millions around the world, making her final years her most influential. We close our time together with the silent eloquence of the Birdbath Memorial. Amma achieved the great goal of the Christian life, self-forgetfulness. Her life was so entirely focused on Christ, so completely poured out in love for others, that she had no need for earthly commemoration. She desired only that attention be drawn to the unseen, living water provided by God. Let the final, powerful truth of her life settle over your heart now, that the highest, most peaceful, and most fruitful life is the one that is fully surrendered and laid down for Christ. As you drift now toward deep, restful sleep, carry with you the peaceful assurance that your life too is held securely by the sovereign, loving God who guided Amy Carmichael from the linen fields of Ireland to the sacred soil of India. May the courage of her faith inspire your own journey, and may the depth of her rest bring peace to your spirit. You are safe, you are loved, you are held. This story is dedicated to glorifying the sufficiency of God's grace as demonstrated in the extraordinary life of Amy Carmichael. If this story has brought peace and rest to your soul, we gently invite you to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you help support the creation of more stories of faith and courage, designed to soothe your mind and anchor your spirit. And if you know someone who needs this message of peaceful faith and surrender, please consider sharing this episode with them. May the quiet echo of Amma's legacy continue to inspire restful nights and purposeful days. Thank you for listening. Rest now, under the quiet echo of Amma's legacy. Good night.